Staying with this story, does the action taken by government thus far suggest our leaders took any lessons from the events of last year? Are the continuing socio-economic woes a ticking time bomb? Let's unpack this with political economist Moeletsi Mbeki. Mr. Mbeki, thank you so much for joining us this evening. So let's start with the lessons that we have learnt since last year, July.
Well, the first lesson, which we've always known, but I think it was driven home by the events of last July, is that when you have such high levels of unemployment, especially of young people, especially of young men, then you are really, really inviting trouble in your society. We've known this for a long time, and the whole world knows it. That's why most countries are terrified of high levels of unemployment. But the South African government seems to be totally unaware of the consequences of high unemployment. And we saw last July why other governments in the world are so terrified of high unemployment and will do almost anything to try and bring down unemployment.
So having made that connection, clearly we haven't learnt that lesson yet because unemployment has increased since then. So do you think the leadership and the decisions they've taken then, the reaction that they showed directly after the July Unrest, and even ANC involvement in what happened? We see those 19 people who've been arrested. Some of them are ANC councillors. Do you see a ticking time bomb for South Africa?
Well, this has been said over and again that South Africa is a powder keg and it's a ticking time bomb. I remember writing an article way back in 2011 pointing out that what was happening in North Africa with the so-called Arab Spring was going to happen to South Africa. And in a way, what happened last year was an illustration of what happens in other countries with high unemployment, with high levels of poverty. Because why should citizens tolerate to live in the shanty towns? Every town in South Africa is ringed by shanty towns. We are now in the middle of the winter, and the temperatures drop below zero, and people are living in these zinc shanty towns. How do they survive? The government should be asking itself, why have we allowed, after 28 years in power, that there are people still living in zinc shanty towns?
So the winter of discontent rings absolutely true. And amid these incredibly crippling fuel price increases that we're experiencing now, the high cost of living, those circumstances have only become exacerbated. And there's a sense of desperation among South Africans. So when we talk about the high cost of living at the moment in South Africa, are we being absolutely negligent not to talk very realistically about a brewing situation?
You see, you have to understand the difference between South Africa and the rest of Africa. The rest of Africa has the people, majority of the people are peasants, which means they have access to land, they own land, they grow their own food, they pay for their school fees from the products that they sell from the land, whether it's coffee, whether it's tea, whether it's vegetable. South African economy is a completely commercialized economy. There is no peasant agriculture in South Africa. So all of us in South Africa depend on the commercial sector of the economy. We don't produce our own food because peasant agriculture was destroyed in order to create a migrant labor system for the mining industry. So that is so when the price of food goes up by 5 cents, whereas in a country like Tanzania, the farmer will grow his or her own food, so it won't make such a difference. In South Africa, it means the world. It means starving for many people because they have to give up eating. Instead of having 2 meals, They have one instead of one. They have half a meal. So this is the nature of our society. And the government seems totally oblivious to the real South Africa.
When we talk about the state of the economy, often we talk reactively about the influence of politics on the economy. But we don't very often talk about the interconnectedness of a political system with an economic system. So with that in mind, do you think South Africa is a failed state, both in terms of its democracy and in terms of its economic situation concurrent to that political system?
No, I don't think South Africa is a failed state. I think we have failed government policies. That is very clear. The levels of poverty that we have in South Africa, the levels of homelessness, the levels of crime, all the malaise that we know is because of the failure of government policies and failure of government. It's not failure of the state. Many people mistake government with the state. No, we don't have a failed state. We have a failed government, yes.
Right. Let's get back to the July unrest of last year and talk about consequences and accountability. That's a big part of what citizens in South Africa want now, post-state capture. They want accountability, they want transparency. Seemingly, there is no accountability for what took place in July last year. We've heard from Police Minister Mbeki that 19 instigators have been arrested, 2 of those cases withdrawn, however, 17 people out on bail, and that they will face the might of the law. But we're not hearing those high-profile names that were bandied about. What do you make of that?
Well, people are looking for a scapegoat. The president set up, after the riots last year, he set up a commission of 3 experts to investigate the causes of the unrest. They came back with a report which was specifically looking at the conflicts within the ANC as being one of the triggers, the high levels of poverty, the high levels of youth unemployment. Now, the question is, we as the voters, that's who we should be targeting. We are looking for a scapegoat, and Mbeki, of course, is only too happy to say, I found 19 scapegoats, these are the people who... But the report of the experts said it wasn't the instigators, it was the levels of poverty, it was the youth unemployment, it was the homelessness. That's what led to... So that's who has to be accountable. And we shouldn't allow Mbeki to send us on a wild goose chase looking for 19 instigators. The ANC government, that's who should be accountable for why, after 28 years in power, do we have such huge levels of poverty in this country? We have half of our population going to bed hungry. We have 27% of children under the age of 5 stunted. That's who should be accountable.
It's perhaps a rhetorical question, but I'm pushing the issue here. How do we hold the ANC accountable?
Well, the people are beginning to hold the ANC accountable. You saw the ANC has lost all the metros in terms of the elections in Gauteng. And that was the backbone of the ANC vote, where the metros in Gauteng, it's lost its majority. So the people are making the ANC accountable. For the first time, the ANC vote fell below 50% in the local government, the national vote, in the local government election. So my expectation is that this is more or less the last we see of an ANC government. We will probably see more the opposition in government after 2024. And that's how it has to account for its failure to solve South Africa's problems of poverty.
Do you think in reacting to a fractured governing party, we will see a more unified South Africa?
Well, I think the ANC can't come together. So I think we have to pack that. It's fractured, and that's all there is to it. I understand that the opposition parties in parliament are starting to talk amongst themselves to see how they can work together to face the challenges that the country has to solve. And for me, that is a positive development, because people, instead of starting to think, I want to be president, they are starting to say, how do we work together to solve the problems that our country is facing? And that, I think, is positive.
That speaks of looking forward.
Yeah.
But a portion of looking forward is always going to be retrospective, looking back to see what happened. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been so much collective trauma that perhaps South Africans also need to take a moment to look back, to really reflect on those deep-seated hurts, all the people lost to COVID-19, all the people lost, and the communities that were deeply fractured by the unrest in July. If we just look at the community's neighbors in Phoenix and their black neighbors who are still, they have not resolved issues a year on. Do we need to have very open, brutal conversations in order to sort of clean those wounds out, or do we just need to move on?
Well, I don't know that this will solve our problems. To me, we as South Africans, we have so many wounds. We have the Anglo-Zulu War. We have the Anglo-Boer War.
Bleeding from head to foot.
So we can spend all our lives looking back and looking at the wounds that we have lived with. We had slavery in this country. So we have a lot of wounds to look at and to try and bandage. But at the end of the day, we have to build a future for South Africa and a future for the future generations of South Africa. And that's what, in my view, that's what we should be focusing on, not on the wounds of the past.
In terms of leadership to bring us all together in order to do that, do you think President Cyril Ramaphosa has another term in him and the wherewithal to bring together so much fracturedness?
Well, I'm very nervous to talk about President Cyril Ramaphosa.
As many people are right now.
Because he still has to account for the dollars in the cushion under the bed in his house. So I would be very reluctant to talk about him in terms of the future until he has explained why has he got foreign currency at his house. Frankly, he has no future because it's illegal to keep foreign currency. So I think let's start to talk about our own future, whether it's there or not there. We have to build the future of South Africa ourselves.
How do we do that in a leadership void? Is there a leadership void if President Cyril Ramaphosa is no longer there? Who do we look to?
I don't think there's a leadership void in South Africa. I think South Africa has strong leaders. When I get out of this building, I get into a car and I buy petrol from a petrol station. That's not telling me there's no leadership. There is the leadership which delivers the petrol. When I wake up in the morning, I have an egg. Somebody has raised a chicken to deliver the egg to the shop and for me to buy. So South Africa has a very good leadership. Okay, now the particular political party that is ruling South Africa now has wrong policies. It has policies that, instead of focusing on a good education system, instead of focusing on looking after the security of our borders, instead of focusing on looking after our railway lines, it is focusing on fighting amongst themselves for positions. But that doesn't mean we don't have leadership. It means that the current ruling party is not the right party for South Africa.
What is the future of the ANC if they continue on their current trajectory?
Well, you know, the future of South Africa if you look at the African continent and look at where liberation movements are today in Ghana, in Zimbabwe, in Kenya, you find that they're all gone. The Liberation Party that Kwame Nkrumah led is gone. The last time I heard it, it had one member of parliament, and that was Nkrumah's daughter. Kaunda's party, which was the Liberation Party of Zambia, is gone. I don't think it has anyone left in parliament. Now the question, so I don't expect the ANC will last much longer. Now the reason is why our liberation movements in Africa have such a short lifespan. Look at the Republican Party in the United States. The Republican Party was the party that abolished slavery in 1865. But it is still there, and it is still a viable party. Why? Because it addresses the welfare of the American people. Our liberation parties addresses the welfare of the elites who lead these parties, rather than addressing the welfare of the country and the welfare of the mass of the people. That's why eventually they disappear within such a short period of time.
The answer, according to Moeletsi Mbeki, is looking forward, not looking back, not looking to our wounds, not waiting for political leadership to take us forward, but to take us forward ourselves. Thank you so much for speaking to us as we reflect on the July unrest of 2021. So much to learn from that unrest and so much still to be done. That was political economist Moeletsi Mbeki.